my pleasure this morning to introduce once again Norma Ginther. Norma's going to speak to us a little bit about assessing parents before visits. And as a frontline worker for HHS, as long as I have been, I know it's important to set up those initial parent contacts as soon as possible. Just from my own experience, I left home yesterday morning about 7 o'clock. And by 7 o'clock this morning, I had already spoke with my daughter 4 times on the telephone, exchanged a couple of emails. So I know how important that contact is to me, so I know how important it is to have that contact with parents that we deal with. So with that being said, I'm going to turn everything over to Norma. She has a wealth of experience and knowledge and training, and she's going to share some of that with us this morning. Thank you.
Well, welcome. I want to start, I'm going to do this with each small group, and we're going to see a few reviews of slides because I want to connect them to what we're talking about in this one. But will anyone come with a pressing issue or question from yesterday? Sometimes it takes us a while to think things through, especially if we're more mature. But does anyone have something that popped in your head yesterday and you want to get it settled before we move on today?
I just wanted to think how we pry therapists' fingers off the stricter visitation when they're working on some of our families. And more than just a judge talking to the parents.
Obviously. They aren't appropriately afraid of the judge. They should be.
What was the question?
I'm sorry, I need to do more of that, so scream at me. That how do we pry the hands off of some of the therapists that we're using who are setting up these unrealistic, restrictive visitation requests. And again, I have to tell you, I did private practice for about 3 years, but see, I chose to work in the area I knew. I worked only with adopted families. And I think sometimes we have young people who have master's degrees in community mental health, and they don't understand some of the different issues. I said to the other group earlier that I would never send a child to a therapist who had not done grief work, because our children are grieving. And that needs to be seen first and foremost, rather than there has to be some reason that some 80% of our kids are diagnosed ADHD. Think of a child in anger in the grief cycle, misdirected, unrelenting anger. Could be ADHD, and I don't want to negate that. I know we're getting somewhere in the area of 70% of our kids with reactive attachment disorder. That's a joke, because from the experts at the University of Minnesota, and Frederici and Mary Dozier out of Delaware, they're saying less than 1/2 of 1% of the whole world are reactive attachment disordered adults. Why are they all our kids? More than that. So again, we need to look at who's doing the therapy. I think we need to do more cross-professional training to say that our kids have suffered in a whole different level. You may be dealing with a kid who's got some attachment issues. About 73% of our kids are disorganized attachment. They show examples of both ambivalent and avoidant. But we need to do more cross-training, because I don't think we're getting people who understand, because the bulk of our kids are going to go home at a minimum level of health and safety. Period. Minimum level. And you know what? I'm not disappointed by that, because the law applies to everybody, not just those people. And I think that that's part of it. I think the other thing is that if you have real issues of attachment or attachment needs, we find somebody who really is an expert in that area to see kids and do assessments. But part of it too is, are these therapists meeting the birth parent? I have seen my parents go to at least the first 4 or 5 sessions their kids were enrolled in. So that therapist saw the birth family along with seeing the foster family. So it may be something as simple as getting them introduced to the birth family. And they also need to get it right. I just talked with the other group, and the fact is the kids should act out. Should act out before, sometimes during, and after. Now, if it's totally off the charts, hysterical vomiting, all of that, then I need to get in there because there may be a very good chance as a caseworker I miss some abuse or neglect that's going on. And our one most commonly missed is sexual abuse. And so the kid finally may feel some safety and freedom, and then we bring back in the sexual abuser, but we've never diagnosed that. So I'm going to do some interviews if the kid has this overriding issue. But as I told the earlier group, that it is absolutely normal for kids to act out. And just real quickly, if you remember the grief cycle that I gave yesterday, that actually describes pretty much what happens to our kids during a visit. Think if you lost your most significant person in your life, they died. And every night when you got home from work, they came back. You could spend the whole night with them, sleep with them that night, but every morning you woke up, they'd be gone. How long would it take you to grieve that loss? Forever. You'd never be able to get through it. Well, and you're not going to go to work the next day and say, oh, by the way, guess who's coming back at night? Because they might take you away. So you're stuck. You don't have these folks to talk to. I'm not going to go home at night and say, boy, this is getting very stressful. I really love you, but I'd love to go out to dinner with my friends once in a while, but I really want to come home and see if you were really going to be there. And I feel so stressed because the person who cares for you might never come back. I've just described visitation. And if I stop it, I can do that. I can stop it totally. No contact. We'd never have a child go home. They should never return home. It's the catch-22 of child welfare that I've lived in 42 years. The issue is that we need to bring the worlds closer together, not further apart. And that's what Child Welfare League of America did several years ago, and did a whole series of child well-being scales for kids who came into foster care. The more frequent the contact, the better organized it was, the more appropriate and planful it was, the higher the rating the children's adjustment in foster care was, to having almost no reactions. Because most of it was done with both families present. Again, some way to change that. So I think at a minimum we need to look at training some of our therapists because they don't know what our job is. And I think that's a real true statement. They think we can walk away and the kid stays out forever and life's good and everybody's happy.
Well, I'm sure you're going to address this, but the reason I came is to hear more about the merits of continuing visitation with an actively using therapeutic alcohol.
Yeah.
You mentioned that yesterday.
Yeah. And I saw the appropriate horror stricken to, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, reaction. So we will talk about that. Good. Anything else?
Well, it seems like in the past we've always put in these succession of services like upgraded family support, intensive family preservation, blah, 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 if you do this kind of visitation, does that replace some of those traditional services? I would think.
It does. In Eau Claire, the first thing to go for them was parenting classes. They saw them being totally ineffective. The research has solidified that totally. And they said what we saw was our family contact specialists gave encouragement and support and hints as the plan was written around what they wanted to see parents doing. And because the relationship, that person's with you almost every day, the parenting changed. And we'll talk about why some of our families have difficulty with parenting, and that's probably their worst issue. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Any others before we jump in?
Any words of wisdom or comments about moving from the supervised visitation piece to moving towards unsupervised contact with families?
Yes, yes, and we will talk more about that, but in the one this morning when we talked about the 3 phases, by the end of the first 8 to 10 weeks, we should be doing what I call kind of, sort of, unsupervised. Kind of, sort of. So for instance, we take the family to the park, because we don't stay in the building. First of all, visits should never be in an office somewhere. It's too traumatizing to the family. No wonder the kid's reacting. You're letting the parent in the same place that he was taken out of to leave. That's our problem. Okay, so you're going to do other environments. I always say it's great. A lot of old parsonages I found have been donated because ministers don't want to live in them, and yet the church owns them. And the one in Des Moines is beautiful. It had like 5,000 square feet in it. I mean, this is a real big church. And they donated it, and they ended up putting a couple of kitchens in. They've got 4 bedrooms. The young children come and spend the whole day. Parents can put them down for a nap. They can give them a bath. They've got places to cook the food. So, and it's totally unconnected to the agency from the standpoint it's nothing like what it was. Cleveland's trying to buy up old houses where the taxes are behind in some of the poorest neighborhoods, because guess where our kids come from? I know that's amazing to you. Yeah. And so they're doing that. The one in Eau Claire, I think I described as a storefront downtown. There's a huge park behind it and a dollar movie down the street. So those are all places people go, and a couple of really great school playgrounds. So you don't stay in a building. But I'm going to start maybe going to the park and letting the family be over here at the swings, and I actually may bring some little bit of work with me, and I'm going to go over and sit at the picnic table and let them play. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to be out of the way totally, but I'm moving toward seeing how well it's handled. I also have to assess the parents, because some parents get angry and violent in high stress or lose control quickly when a child is defiant. I need to know all that, if that makes sense to us. I moved to unsupervised. Remember, there was a state that got in a huge amount of trouble several years ago. They never allowed children unsupervised visits till they returned home, or an overnight stay at home. And they suddenly exploded, and in about 4 months, 2 families killed their children. And the court held the agency criminally liable. That's the stupidest, you should take some risk. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You never even saw whether the parent could manage the child in 5 minutes while you were outside. And better he be hit than what we did, which was goodbye, the kid's going home permanently. I'll see you once every 30 or 45 days. Couldn't believe they did it, but they did it. So again, we need to take what I call reasonable risk. And so it has to happen. One other one, we'll jump in.
Usually the justification for restricting visitations or limiting them, etc., that I hear a lot is that somehow motivates the parents to do the other things they're supposed to do.
Well, based on
An answer to
every
that.
personal situation I've seen and every piece of research, that's just not true. It's not true, because particularly with drugs and alcohol, who is in charge of that parent when we take the kids? The disease. The disease. I live for the disease. I can't not live for the disease until I come to grips with that. I've got to figure out what that motivation is, but it would only be the child if the attachment was just incredibly strong and things were great. We all would die for our children in a heartbeat. We don't have any of your children. Do you see? Other things have made it impossible for the child to rise to the top. So I'm just hard pressed to understand how not seeing or having contact with the child increases my attachment. Do you see what I mean? So it's just not true. It's convenient, but not true. And it blows me away. It runs against everything in parenting, it runs against everything in child development, and against everything in attachment. So no. Reward and punishment. We did a little on that yesterday. It doesn't work. Or we'd send every kid home. Right? Yeah. So again, we have to think about what we say.
On the reward and punishment issue, we've been working locally to try to develop a parenting times guideline that is developmentally appropriate. Is it appropriate to look at progress on the safety issues of the case plan when you're evaluating to either decrease supervision or increase visitation?
No, why don't we start out with visitation as a whole separate plan and just say how much can we give you because it's the most important thing we can do for your children. I have the motivation to work on safety issues if I don't see my kids. It doesn't matter. Again, it's almost looking, and it's not anyone's fault, it's almost looking backwards, like somehow we can drive you into it. We can't do that or we wouldn't have had your kids. Because I would be willing to bet you, for all the kids we have, there have been previous incidents that we don't know about. And safety didn't incur as a result of those. So again, it's not that I'm not going to work the case plan if mom has inappropriate boyfriends around. But on the other hand, I'm probably not going to have family contact at home. So that's safety. But the issue is I got to develop a relationship with her before I can even expect change from her too. Sometimes we think if we just make the rule, it'll work. We just haven't found it to be successful in parenting. All right, let's talk about some of these special considerations. Again, why we see our family has a lot to do with not only the health of our family, but the things we get out of it. We're selfish. We want things, good feedback. We want that support. We want that encouragement. And so our kids feel that very same way. And if you remember yesterday when we talked about the attachment, our kids have hope because it's not that their needs are never met, it's the intermittent meeting of the need. So if occasionally, maybe even every fourth time I get the bottle, I'm going to keep coming back. And it may be that there's 6 months where there's no physical abuse. Stress is low in the family, mom's not using. It's pig heaven. I'm having a great time. And then suddenly, something happens that brings it back. It may be intermittent neglect. I was on drugs on medication appropriately for 3 years. I was doing real well. I could meet their needs to a minimum extent. Now I'm back being full-blown psychotic, horribly depressed. I can't do it. So we have kids with maladaptive attachment as opposed to no attachment. So why they want to see their family? To figure out if it's good or bad, which is a big part of it. Somebody got a picture. Can you take that? Again, great resources. There are gobs of them. In terms of this has gotten to be a very, very relevant topic, and lots of people are writing information. And I think I gave you yesterday My days are divided up, I'm weird. Dr. Byer, B-E-Y-E-R, which is now doing, Dr. Marty Byer is doing fantastic family interaction therapy. He's a psychologist. And he operates with parents and children who are separated in foster care to help them get their kids back. And he does it in family contact. She, wrong gender. She does it in family contact, and she's training people all over the country. Good evidence-based research with it.
This might seem silly, but there have been studies now that show that if you take cattle and you feed the cattle and call to them, and so they come when they're called, and there was a long-standing belief that you had to feed them every time or they won't come, but some universities have proven that you don't have to feed them every time. They will come anyway, and kind of like they're coming to see if there is feed. But just because you didn't feed them last time, next time, if you don't feed them on Monday, you call them and don't feed them, and then if you come out there and call them on Tuesday, just as many of them will come on Tuesday as came on Monday.
And what happens is the fewer times you replenish it, the fewer times you feed them, it begins to drop off.
Right.
It begins to drop off. So the fewer opportunities to get fed, the quicker I'm going to stop coming. Yeah, that's intermittent reinforcement. Absolutely. I've seen it done with humans. Humans are really gullible. Cows maybe were smarter for a long time, but yeah, that's part of it. Again, real quickly, the issue is that we're doing family interaction to solve these problems. So I need to look at how I'm going to schedule it, who's going to be important, and what the issues are, just real quickly. Because I want the family relationship to stay strong. With an infant who is forced to transfer that attachment quickly to the person who feeds me, the person who holds me, the person who changes my diaper, that means that I am going to have enough contact that the voice, the holding, reissues those feelings every few days at maximum or at minimum in order to sustain that attachment. Kids don't go home if we destroy the attachment. Kids don't go home. Parents don't do it because they grieve and leave. They get pregnant again. So we need to be realistic about what we're doing and why we're doing it. That the issue is that that has to be reinforced significantly enough to begin to show that I have a chance of getting sustained in these areas. So part of this whole issue is that infants and toddlers and preschoolers up to age 5 should see their families every day. Think about your own children. I think about my grandbabies. I've got 14 of them. 3 of them are 18, so they're not really babies. But they're cute. But I look at the infants. When I used to take a newborn, one of my grandkids, one of the first things I always asked my daughter or son was, are they an uppie, a downy, or a football before I took them for the first day? What was I asking? How you hold them. It saves you hours of pain and suffering. You know, my own son was one that he liked to lay this way, head down here. He's a football. Maybe that's why he was such a good athlete. Then an uppie, snuggled up under your chin. Then a downy, the one that likes this kind of one. So I need to know that because I don't want to inhibit their attachment. We now know that children have memory in utero. That's why that old silly thing about playing music while you're pregnant works so well. They hear their parents' voice before they're born. You can watch babies who are newborn. Once they get over the trauma of the birth, within the first day or two, they'll hear a voice and they'll start looking around for it. And they react differently to the voice they've heard in utero than if the nurse walks in and says something. We know that they have dreams and nightmares. Our daughter, who came to us at 7 months and had the 5 placements, for the first 2.5 years she lived in our home, she never slept through the night at all. And she'd go down about 8:30 at night. And we noticed one other thing before I even say that, is she would sit wherever you put her. She didn't fall back or snuggle or move close to you. Used to love it growing up because when she got sick, she'd let you hold her. The issue is, she would go to bed at night about 8:30, you know, the rocking, because I rock everybody, even my 37-year-old son. Just saw in Hawaii. The issue was I would rock her to sleep, she'd go down, about 11:30, she would utter this incredible blood-curdling scream. Worst scream I've ever heard in my adult life. And that meant you would go in, you'd sit on the toy box, head on the crib, and her hand on her back all night long. We alternated the nights. But we won't tell my husband that. But we did that for 2.5 years, and as an adult today, she still has the white light dream. No voices that you can understand, just sounds, white light, and terror. And she grinds her teeth at the age of 38, to the point where she's going to have something fixed. Our kids have had some of those experiences, and the more they've had, the younger. That's why we're doing infant trauma treatment all over the country now. That's where kids are going to therapy, not verbal therapy, taking them back to the infancy when they suffered the abuse and neglect. We need to think about that. So I'm going to only repair it if I change the way that has happened. So I'm going to give families lots of contact. I'm going to challenge them when they're not safe with the child. But I need to make sure that's long enough and quick enough, because otherwise they're going to transfer it to the foster mom, which is fine if they're never going home. But I'm not sure we should make that decision the first day of placement. So infants up through preschoolers need to see their parents probably every day. Now, by about 2, my one grandson would get through an overnight. He'd be fine. We'd do something really fun like Chuck E. Cheese on Friday night. He was great. Saturday morning, he'd come in at 7. Naughty, call Daddy. Call Mommy. So we had to have a live conversation. Why would we assume that the kids who come in here would need any less than that? I mean, just looking at my own kids, and they were healthily attached. They didn't need to make up for lost time. They didn't need to have corrective intervention to strengthen appropriate attachment. They were acting normal. And we make sometimes that assumption they don't need as much. Look at what I'm trying to stop. That's a load. So just in that time frame, we need to look at it. School-age kids, minimum of 3 to 5 times a week, basically. Developmentally.
I'd like your opinion about this whole notion of therapy, because you talked about Dr. But that's certainly not something that is probably widespread.
Marty Beyer has trained a whole lot of people. And again, I'm not marketing his goods, but there are 2 or 3 other interventions where they will come in and train all your people. So it's something that's easy to do. I don't need to be a PhD psychologist to do it. And it's a way of coaching families by the use of a Bluetooth while they're doing their family contact. And one of the most important parts is the positive comments parents hear when they do it right, which is interesting.
Now, that's very different though, because we long had the issue of therapeutic visitations being used, that term being used, but really what it is visitation and therapy appointment.
Oh, no. This is,
I would like your opinion about that.
I don't have a negative. Like I said, when my kids started going to counseling, when they moved in our home and we were working on things, I insisted and had parents come to intermittently, at least the first 5 to 7 appointments with the kids. And I felt that that therapist needed to know where they were coming from, what were the history, what were the issues, in order to even work with the child. But that's not the same as what Dr. Beyer and Barbara Bode at the University of Cincinnati has a huge grant working on that very same thing. And it's through family contact that you do the intervention.
But it's also not the same as what we're dealing with, because I believe that there is some notion that that's the only contact that can be had, is the children in the context of the therapy appointment. But there's nothing outside of that that's appropriate. See what I'm saying? We're getting orders all the time, and the therapists are saying that is what needs to happen, and we're getting orders.
But it's not,
When the kids are acting, I'm having my therapist slow down to 2 hours a week to minimally, because the therapist say this or the caseworker say this, the kids, parents, kids are acting out before visits.
Thank God.
After visits.
Don't adopt one who doesn't
And
act.
so what happens, my parents are getting fewer and fewer visits, our visits are being stopped completely. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know
Well,
how to change that.
I'm not sure how to stop it. All I can tell you is I'd certainly love to see the material they're basing their decisions on. If it's acting out, then I can probably give you a list a mile long of stuff that says kids should act out. I think that, well, look at John Bowlby's work. Vera Fahlberg, A Child's Journey Through Placement, are all really, really strong on attachment and attachment development. And Vera, now I know that there's some controversy. Vera Fahlberg started Evergreen out in Colorado. And she worked with kids who were basically, we're going to have to just shoot them because you can't raise them. They had such horrible attachment histories, and she was able to work with them. And they've done holding therapy. So if you run into controversies around holding therapy, that was this much of their whole program. And I still am absolutely sold on it. So, and that's Vera Fahlberg, Fahlberg. Fahlberg. John Bowlby. Real definitive work in attachment. I'd have to stop and think about some of the others I would encourage you to use, but I first would want to see where they're getting their research. And I only do evidence-based research. The Child Welfare Gateway, Information Gateway is a good place to look for research. It's evidence-based practice, not, gee, it sounds like something we ought to try because it looks like it would work. We spent $5 or $6 million on parenting classes.
For foster parents, if you're having trouble with foster parents, you need to refer to session 4 in the TRI training. Because that talks a lot about visitation. And as a foster parent, I'm real picky about what therapist my kids need to go to.
I am absolutely picky.
Some parents have to fight with that. But, mention that.
Not maybe.
I'd be real particular about the therapists I use. But therapists that are doing that, they're not therapists that are well informed, and they're just gonna make things worse. Reverse
Yeah, and the issue is, again, I am very clear, I would never send my child to a therapist who doesn't know how to do grief work, because that's such a big issue. I also want someone who may not be a trained solely attachment therapist, but understands the components and the need for healthy attachment. So again, I think that we need, if nothing else, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, we need to educate judges as to what's working and what's not working, because I truly, seriously, have not been in a state where therapists have had that much to say about anything. They usually will raise an issue, I think it should be reduced, and if they're told go away, you're not doing it, they'll usually agree. And I don't know how we can make it less or not have it and not violate every federal law I can think of. Oh. And I've been to other parts, you know. Been in Arizona, been in Iowa. But again, we really need to look at that. I can't even stop visits when I filed for permanent custody. I can't reduce them or change them in any capacity until I have a hearing, because I'm making determinations pre-legal involvement. So I think we need to look at that. Okay, real quickly, and
I think I want you to debunk my vision, is that sometimes you have a mother and a father who are separated, or both involved in the case, and then you're talking, 4 to 5 visits a week. That's 4 to 5 times with mom, 4 to 5 times with dad, and grandma comes in, and I have should there be a concern about all the travel time and visit time and no sort of downtime, or is that contrary thinking to family?
no, I think you can get crazy, and you will. What I would suggest, if the parents are able to work it all together, can we do it Monday from 3 to 5 and 4 to 6? Do you see what I'm saying? Where it's back to back, the kid gets, because in the real life of that child, if they return home, they'll go back and forth. I think that you need to look at, why am I now including grandma right now? Again, maybe perfect reason, but I think we really have to examine it. It's not like if I'm saying for family it's 6 times a week, everybody's going to be at 6 times a week. If father has not had custody, has no interest in choosing custody, I may give him fewer family contacts and continue to intensify the family that parent's going to be with. If I have some questions about mom, I may make the family contact at grandma's house, and mom comes over. I mean, I think there's some ways to play with it. The issue is, I want as much as I can get from the first minute that kid gets into care, and I want to work it with as many people as we feel that child should be seen.
And in my caseworkers, they start out, that child is removed. My parents will get 2 to 8 hours per week. And then, well, if you do good, well, maybe we'll add another couple hours. Maybe.
And that's the
And this is
old
from
myth.
this is from, babies on up. This is.
Again, that's what has to change, and it's had to change in every state that we've been working in. So is that feeling that you earn your parenting right. Yeah. And if the case is that horrific, the child should never see the parent again, then why aren't we filing directly for permanent? We have that right. I have to prepare a permanency case in 60 days, but I should be able to do it if it's that horrific. And if not, then what are we doing? We just need to think it through. Again, real quickly, we're going to get into normalized and look at what we're really trying to do for kids is to be sure we're enhancing relationships, that we're reducing trauma, so we don't want visits to be stressful, we want it to be fun, we want it to be a good time. It's not going to be sitting in a room somewhere and us all staring at each other. I think I said yesterday, done that when I had 3 preschoolers at the doctor's office. You'd have seen some pretty inappropriate parenting. Don't judge me on that. Most of us who have youngsters preschool age, they play around us while we do other things. So if mom's making lunch, then it needs to be in a place where there's a kitchen and the preschoolers are there. How does she handle that? See, that's been one of the problems. We have no idea how real life gets in the way, and then we get concerned that a kid gets hit the first or second time there's a home visit. We need to understand that before we jump into it. And again, I need to be sure that there's less fear and less self-blame. That for me is one of the reasons I'm going to have kids visit when parents are impaired. They're still drinking. You're not even there. How's it your fault? They're still using. You haven't been living at home for a month. Again, there may be cases I'm going to be going to permanent on. And then I need to let the child come to that. One of the horrible problems, and we'll get to this in a minute, is that we decide we're going for permanent custody. And we, either it's the judge, the court, the attorneys, the worker, the foster parent, say, we're going for permanent custody because your parent's impaired all the time. Their drug and alcohol issues are too big. Parent comes for a visit and says, don't worry, I'm getting better, I'm doing fine. Sees him for an hour. Who's the kid gonna plead? Even if a relative thinks mom should have the kids back, you gonna compete against a relative? No way. These are the kids who never have a rational idea that I can't live at home, unless mom can't even pick up my little brother because she's wobbling so bad when she comes for visits. Do you see what I mean? Then I have something to talk about. And I think that that is part of the learning that we have to do. Along with the fact, for many of our parents, that's their highest stress moment of the week. If they're considering and recognizing the problem, then why are we asking them to do the impossible before they're ready? Before they're able to get into treatment, before they get into the skills and the equipment to use. Basic elements of a plan. And these have to be separate plans. This is one of the things that we'll talk a little more about in nuts and bolts. But in this, what we're looking at is you need frequency. And for me, it's how often can we get you together? Number 2, length of time. Again, with younger children, more frequent maybe than the length of time. With older kids, having a Saturday afternoon together may be more valuable than seeing mom every single day of the week. Is there a library in the neighborhood? Can the parent and child meet at a library to do homework? Do you have access to a computer? Most in Wisconsin, we built the visitation center, the family contact center as they call it. What we put in was we got donated 5 or 6 computers that are in the school age and teenage room in the basement, so you can come and do homework every day with your kids after school. And so again, we need to provide those things that are available. Where is it? Who's supervising it? Why are they supervising? That's the biggest question. What are you looking for? What are you expecting would be a positive thing to find, and what may be a detriment? You notice we only look for the negative. And then, who can come What support services, transportation, information around where they can be. Does mom have a library card? What needs to be built in there that we can have these things occur on a regular basis? What are the activities? What's the expectation of the parent to plan activities, to provide things for the event? We get furious with a parent who shows up for family contact at 3:30 in the afternoon and brings a bag of candy they picked up at a neighboring drugstore. I heard from workers, I hear from foster parents, and then lets the kid eat it. What are they going to do with it? For many of our families, when they're riding the city bus, they may not have any place but the drugstore next door to get anything. We don't see it as positive. Number two, they don't have much money. You can buy candy with food stamps. We don't even teach foster parents how to handle the bag of candy that comes home. I'm a great foster parent. I learned far more from my foster parents than I did a lot of other people. And what she would do is when the kid came home with the candy, and she was about this far off the floor because she'd eaten it all afternoon, she said, "Isn't it great that your mom thought of you on her way to see you? Isn't that fantastic?" She said, "You know, you have a right not to share this at all. This can be your thing, your special thing." She said, "But what I'd like to do is I'm going to put it in our locked cupboard," because every good foster home has a locked cupboard. "And every day after school, when you first get home, I'm going to let you take 2 or 3 pieces, and I want you to sit down and tell me 2 or 3 things that are great about your family. And we'll make this last the whole time till you see your mom or dad again. Next week, you know there's going to be candy. So when she leaves for that visit, you pitch what's left, because you've regulated it, and you add the new candy. And then you start helping the child decide. When our kids were visiting, I had a kid who was 12, and he was going every other weekend to see his great-grandmother. It was the only family he really had around and connected to. And she had very limited low income. And all our kids learned to cook. Everybody at our house cooked. We rotated one night a week. So we were teaching them to cook. And we knew that grandma didn't have money to really feed him very well. So his job to get to go to that visit was to make meals for the weekend. And he figured out the menu, what was going to be cooked. He baked the cookies. He got the sloppy joes ready. We put everything in a bag that was labeled. And therefore, he provided something for the contact. And grandma wouldn't have to spend her little bit of money she had on feeding him. As a foster parent, we can encourage them to send some of that. You know, mommy's brought cookies 3 weeks in a row. I'll call mommy and say, "Our Candy, don't stop because Julie really wants to make cookies, and she's got some pretty healthy oatmeal cookies she's making." Instead, we like to complain instead of really doing something that's different. So again, we need to know what activities are expected and whose role is it in that process. We need every piece of case identification information on it, and this is the most important. Why is the child in care? What are the issues? What is the risk? How do we protect the child? And if the child needs to be protected. Because if I'm going to eventually have grandma supervising the visits, she needs to have access to that information. She needs to know what the plan is all along that's going to keep kids safe. So that's got to be in every plan. The parent has to agree that it's going to be there. It's got to be least restrictive. Most normal place. That's never ever the agency office. If it can be in a normal environment, family contact center. That contact center can't be an office building. It needs to have kitchens and beds and places to spend time. Because I could extend or have longer visits before I do unsupervised hope. It has to provide safety. So we've got to be able to get people in, get people out, assure safety to our level, and then say, parent, you're in charge of safety. Somebody had a comment.
On the back one, on visits who can be around when it occurs, that parents penalized if neighborhood kids came over to play, if they were having contact with other children, they had to get the social security numbers and verify that the other people, whether they were neighbors or kids, were appropriate for them to have visits with them.
That's interesting. I know that in foster homes, we have to supposedly get clearance if kids are going to spend nights places away from where we are. That does make sense to me, that we need to make sure the other family at least knows this is a foster child, knows any other issues that are concerns. But if the parent is living in a neighborhood where that child could spend the rest of their life, I'm not sure we need to be focusing that hard on that issue. Does it make sense that there are many other issues we need to be working with the family on? Now, a child comes home and complains or says the kids were inappropriate, and the first few times, probably the family contact specialist would be there and be in and out during that time. That's why you're going to move them back to the home if there's any way we can do that. She would notice the kids were going over. That's going to help me then understand what kind of people parent finds appropriate and doesn't. Somebody's going to be there. Do you see what I mean? But again, I think that it's kind of like when we built the adolescent room for family contact and we put in the video games and everybody, we had people say, there should be no video games. They should not be entertained and you can talk. I said, have you ever had an adolescent? They only talk at 11:30 at night while you're trying to go to sleep and they just got in from work, or at 6:30 in the morning when they're getting ready to go to school. And how many of you have your own teenagers and play video games with them? Absolutely. You can have fantastic conversations with them doing that. So again, we're being a little unrealistic to take parents with the least level of parenting skills and expect a totally unreasonable outcome and then being disappointed when they fail at it. There's a problem there, but it's not with the parent or child. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yes.
So I think we need to really look at that. Never ever office. Do you see at the bottom down there? Never ever ever office. Can be in their own home. That's always first choice. Is getting that kid back into their own home for family contact. Can be in the foster home. A neutral place. I had a lot of foster parents who would meet at McDonald's Playland for their kids to play and meet with the family. I actually have two good friends of ours who have one woman's grandchild in legal custody, and her daughter had another child, which she said, I won't continue to take the children. So another foster family has that child, and they met together down at story time at the library, and the birth mom came along. So those are all possibilities that you can use in terms of a neutral environment. And then last would be the office. So you've got to think about, how do I get this out of any fixed environment? Because families are going to not necessarily stay in one room their entire life. When I look at roles, we looked at the whole planning issue. And we talked a little bit at the other workshop about foster, we're gonna try and get to parent. Don't tell us that. Let's talk about parents' roles and responsibilities. First of all, they're in charge of safety. I'm not, foster parents not, you are. Number two, they need to help with transportation, but ultimately it's the agency's problem. We took the kids. We have to make sure they can get there. And for many parents, I would go get them the first few times as a worker. Because can you imagine anything more frightening in your life than knowing somebody's going to be sitting there watching you talk to your children? You wouldn't even know how to act naturally. What if I tease them about how funny their haircut is or anything like that, and somebody misconstrues it? It's terrifying. It's terrifying. Then they need to come when it's scheduled, and you may see this one, call to cancel, and tell the child you're canceling. I laughingly said in the last group that I had a kid whose mom didn't come, and I couldn't tell the child how. I was the worker. So I said, well, let's go find out why mom didn't come today. So we just got in the car and drove over to the house. I got out and knocked on the door and said, Mrs. Smith, I have no idea why you didn't come today, but Johnny was really concerned, so we came and you tell him why. It's not my job to tell him why. We run parents off. And we need to be sure we're not doing that. Then, they need to be parents when they're parenting. They need to plan things, they need to clean up the mess with the child, they need to do parent activities so we can see if they're willing and able to do that. And they need to be able to respond to direction. Now, I don't feel that if I'm working with a parent as a supervision specialist, that I need to be constantly intervening, but I'm going to take notes, and we're going to meet before the visit and talk about what went on last time. And then we're going to meet after the visit to talk about what's changed, what's the same, what are the things we're working on, and did the parent meet those skills? So it's not like blind situations. I may have to do direction, but I will say I will try to avoid that unless I think it's an emergency. That the kid is ready to tip off the little slide because they're turning around backwards. I think that's a fair warning. And then they need to make sure they're following the rules that happen. Foster families have ultimate responsibility for some things. They should be transporting their children. I realize there are agencies that use transporters. I can think of nothing more horrible in my life as a foster parent, thinking you put your child in with a stranger and send them somewhere and they come back because I just couldn't do it. So that's my personal thing. They need to have regular ongoing contact with the parent. They need to be there early, have a contact with the parent, talk about how the week's gone, talk about how the few days are gone, talk about the discipline note. That was always the first thing I called parents about. We have a meeting, Johnny's gotten suspended. Can I pick you up in the morning? Yeah, good. I don't need to practice that. They need to be the people at every IEP meeting so they can sign them. We don't need to provide that, but the parent, in fairness, has to know what's happening. So that's our role. Then, we need to be sure we're documenting behavior before, during, and after. Not as a punitive measure, but I need to know the level because what else could be going on? And that's a critical one. We need to encourage the contact and support the child. We had a child who was in our home And she's the one who came at 13, and her anger had controlled the entire children's home she was in at the time. They didn't even ask her to clear her place because she could throw a 4-hour tantrum in a heartbeat. So she came to our house, and her first 6.5-hour temper tirade was when I said, you know, miss, if you turn that dish around, you'll probably be able to get the last 2 in. That was the biggest thing I said. So we had a 6.5-hour temper tirade. She was our FU kid. Did I tell you in the other group what her favorite word was? Goddamn motherfucking son of a bitch. All one word. She could scream it through the community. She was smart enough, by the way, she convinced the deputy sheriff in her county to give her the juvenile court judge's home phone number. And she had been, her IQ was tested 3 days after a suicide attempt in the hospital. 150. Yeah. So, Mom had gotten out of a horrible, violent marriage. She was terrified. She'd been beaten for years. And she was scared to death to have Missy visit. Because if Missy got mad, there was no holds barred. And she said, I love her. I can't do it. I'm too tired to have contact and have her screaming. And she complained any visit when we sent her on the bus to her county. So we switched him to our house, and she had weekend visits. She complained because her mom was on a limited income, didn't have money. So we said, okay, we'll give you as much money as your mom has to entertain your mom when she comes for a visit on the weekend. So we gave her $10. And she suddenly lived in a big city, so it was a little different how far that $10 went. She was to plan the visit. And it was hysterical. Mom needed the support. She needed somebody around. She was difficult. She was a difficult kid. And one Saturday morning, I remember being in my room, and she comes out of her room, and she's screaming at the mom, and Mom looked at her, and she said, you know that bus I rode yesterday? It goes 2 ways. She said, so we're either going to have a great weekend, or I'm going down the bus station, and I'm catching it the other way in about an hour. So Missy stomps off, screaming and yelling, and I opened the door, and I went, and as a result, we moved her home. We brought biology. Then that has to be done in the therapist's office in a very controlled setting.
What if the child is the perp of another child in the home?
We really need to look at that because for years we've tried to fix kids with adult solutions. And what we've discovered is we're suddenly now, you know, we didn't have sexual abuse ever. Now we diagnose everybody. There are kids who experiment. There are kids who are testing. I always look at power and control. Is it a real perp? Is it the kid is ignorant and 14 and almost like, I'll look at yours and play with it if you look at mine? Where are we on that continuum? And we know there are kids with perp through adolescence and never perp as adults. And yet we sometimes try to say you can never be around children again. I think we need a really, really good sexual abuse assessment on any kid under the age of 18. And then I'm going to follow with a sexual abuse expert. And then I'm going to follow their information. We found there were lots of kids in the Amish community having inappropriate sibling relationships. And finally, I worked with a county that was almost 3/4 Amish, and they allowed us to write a sex abuse curriculum because they were uneducated. It was like, I'll never see anybody naked, so you're my little sister and I'm babysitting you, so get your clothes on. And yet, it sounded like force, but it was almost experimentation. So I think that I would want a good evaluation. Okay?